scream, heavy in the streets.
We gon' get it, we gon' get it, we gon' get it. We gon' get it, we gon' get it. Get it in blood. Get it in blood. We gon' get it, we gon' get it, we gon' get it. We gon' get it, we gon' get it. Get it in blood. Get it in blood.
Good rich.
Get it out the mud.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Saints and Appetizers podcast. And I'm Ethan, and we're back. We haven't had any appetizers seems like in forever, and we got some for you. We got some appetizers coming down the pike, and what we have for you this evening is UFC 283. Teixeira versus Hill prediction show, and this prediction show, this UFC 283 is hailing from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Saturday, January 21st, 2023, and this is at the standard time. At 10 p.m. Eastern time, and this is actually the first event that they've held in Brazil since March 2020. When I heard that, I was surprised that it has been almost 2 years or two. Let's see, 2020, 2023, almost 3 years, I guess, since they've had an event, and I guess if my math is right, since they've had an event in Brazil. So that blows my mind that it's been almost 3 years since they've had an event. Yeah, so now that I'm actually doing the math again in my head, I cannot believe that it's almost been 3 years since they've had an event in Brazil. So that just blows my mind. Now, I mean, it blows my mind even more now that I'm recalculating, because now that I'm thinking about it, I can't, now that I'm realizing it's still hard to believe that it's already 2023 now. I'm still stuck in 2022. I thought it had just been 2 years, almost 2 years since that they've had an event in Brazil, but it's actually almost been 3 years. That's crazy to me, because they've had events like over in Saudi Arabia, and I think they've had events in Europe, but they haven't had any events in Brazil in almost 3 years, which is just wild, because that's half of their fighters, more, it seems like like almost half their fighters are from Brazil, and their biggest market and fan base is Brazilian, Portuguese fighters, so that's amazing. That's crazy that they haven't had any events in Brazil in that long. So that just blows my mind. But anyways, I just want to get in some of my predictions on the main card. This is I think I kind of talked about how the last main card, main event pay-per-view. This is the first pay-per-view of 2023, and it's been a while since they had a pay-per-view card, and I kind of thought that last card was kind of underwhelming, and it came up underwhelming, and the main event and co-main event were kind of anticlimactic with how all that turned out, with Blachowicz and Magomedov Ankalaev, that being a split draw, and then Paddy Pimblett and Jared Gordon, how people didn't think he actually had won that fight, and Jan Blachowicz and Magomedov Ankalaev, that being a draw, a split draw, that kind of leads into why this fight between between uh, um, Glover Teixeira and Jamel Hill is happening. That's why this fight's happening, because I think uh, Glover Teixeira would have fought the winner uh, of Magomedov Ankalov and Jan Blachowicz, but because it was split draw, he ended up not having an opponent. So they ended up having to pick out Jamal Hill instead. But let's get into some of these picks. The first fight off the main card, and kind of see what I think about this card. So can I get a menu, and let's get into this main card. So the first fight on the main card is a light heavyweight match between Paul Craig and Johnny Walker, and that's a pretty interesting fight to start off this card. And man, that's an exciting way to start off the first pay-per-view of the 2021 season, or the 2023 uh, year of the pay-per-view. And this is a fight that could be very interesting in the way it could go. And for a guy that had so much potential early on in his career, and Johnny Walker, I think he, for a lot of people and a lot of fans, he's kind of been underwhelming with his high potential and where a lot of people thought he could be, because he started out as a heavyweight and then kind of showed that he didn't necessarily have the chin to be a heavyweight, and then he dropped down to light heavyweight. Even at that weight class, he showed that he didn't have necessarily the chin or or the ability to be dominant at that weight class. And even in his last few fights, let's see here, uh, he's in the last 6 fights, he's only 2-4 in his last 6 fights. So he's definitely not killing it. Even in his last 6 fights, he's not been great. But he did win his last fight. If it's if that's anything, uh, that's for all for nothing. He did win his last fight against Ian Kutalabe by submission by rear naked choke, but then he lost the 2 previous fights, and that one of those was to the fighter who's fighting for the belt, and that's Jamel Hill, who KO'd him in the first round. But he's just kind of a unpredictable fighter, and he's kind of very inconsistent. Johnny Walker, I just don't have wouldn't put a lot of faith, a lot of faith in in, in Johnny Walker. But then Paul Craig, he's definitely probably would be a lot safer bet for sure, and he's definitely been a lot more consistent and just definitely more reliable veteran. And he in his last 6 fights or so, he's been pretty consistent. He's let's see here. He's like four, four, one, 1-1. So he has a draw in there, but his one in his last fight, he lost to Vulcan Volkan Oezdemir by decision, but all of his wins that he has uh, in that 6 fight win streak were all by stoppage. He has like a submission by triangle, choke, TKO, elbows, uh, and punches, TKO, submission by punches, submission by triangle, choke, and then he had just a split draw um, at the tail end of that 6 fight um, of those 6 fights against Mauricio Shogun Hua, who is actually is having his last fight of his career on this card as well. So that's something interesting to watch for on this card. So I mean, just going off of that 6 fight sample size, I think this is a pretty, at least for me, this is a pretty easy one to pick here, and kind of just going off of that, I think I would probably go for with Paul Craig in this one, and I want to say I want to pick Paul Craig to knock Johnny Walker out, but the only thing that kind of deters me from picking Paul Craig to do that is because Paul Craig has had 22 fights in his career with 16 wins and 5 losses, but he only has three knockouts in his career, and 13 submissions, 3 knockouts, 13 submissions, 0 by decisions, which is odd, and 3 losses by knockout, 1 submission by knockout, 1 decision, 1 draw. But the interesting thing is, in those last 6 fights he's had, 2 of the ones that say they're by submissions is well, one of the ones that says it's by submission says TKO submission to says it's to TKO submission to punches, but I wonder if that still goes down as a TKO or by punches. So that's a little confusing. I guess it still goes down by TKO, but anyways, it just says he only has 3 knockouts, so he's not really a knockout artist. But still, I still want to say that he's going to knock Johnny Walker out, because that was kind of a string of what he was kind of known for, kind of having a bit of a glass jaw. But I guess really when you look at his record, that's not necessarily the case, because he's definitely a knockout artist in his own right. Definitely more so than Paul Craig if you just go off of record, because Johnny Walker has 26 fights, 19 wins, 15 by knockout, 3 by submission, 1 by decision. Only been has 7 losses, only been knocked out 4 times. So I mean that's really a misconception about him. One by submission and 2 by decision. So I mean, it's not like he has a huge history of being knocked out, but that's how most of his losses have come, the way they've come by. But just for fun, I'm gonna pick Paul Craig and say it's gonna come by knockout, just for fun, and just because that's what everyone says, how it says they come by. So in the first bout, light heavyweight bout between Paul Craig and Johnny Walker, I'm gonna pick Paul Craig to knock Johnny Walker out. So on to the second fight on the main card between women's flyweight bout between Jessica Andrade versus Lauren Murphy, and this just seems to be kind of a mismatch in my opinion. I'm just kind of surprised that these two are fighting each other to some extent, just because I don't know. I think just because I'm such a huge football fan, and basketball fan, other sports type fan, I always seem to look at the age of fighters, and Lauren Murphy, I see that she's gonna be 40 in July, and then I look at Jessica Andrade, who is 31 years old. Well, I guess will be 32 in September, who's just prime of her career. The only women's fighters that she's lost to in recent memory are just straight up killers, and Valentina Shevchenko, all women that have been champions, like Valentina Shevchenko, Rose Namajunas, and Zhang Wei Li. Like those are the only women that she's like ever lost to, in recent history. Like the last person that she's lost to that hasn't like held the belt was Raquel Pennington back in like 2015. But just like, and then I guess Jonah Jędrzejczyk in 2017, but she was a champion then as well. That was for the women's strawweight champion. So those are all just like champions that she fought to. Like she's not losing to scrubs. Every other woman that she fights, she knocks out, like or submits them. Like Amanda Lemos was her last fight. She submitted her by standing arm triangle choke. Like you have to be a complete powerhouse to do that to another woman, choke them out with a standing triangle choke. Or Cynthia Calavo, she TKO'd her with punches, and Caitlin Chakangio TKO'd her with body punches. Like those are all the wins in between losing to any of these straight up murderers. She even TKO slam or KO slammed Rose Namajunas. Like this just seems like a complete mismatch with Lauren Murphy, who, like I said, will be 40 in July. And like Lauren Murphy, her last win was against kind of like a washed up Miesha Tate, who she beat by decision, which it was a pretty dominant decision. She left Miesha Tate all beaten and bloodied and battered, and that was back in July. That was July 16th. And that was just a 3-round fight. For some reason, I thought that was a 5-round main event, but I guess it wasn't. And then the fight before that was at UFC 66, and that was all the way back in 2021. And that was to Valentina Shevchenko, which she lost by elbows and punches. And that was for the flyweight championship. And she had won previously to that 5 fights in a row, but I don't know. I find it hard to believe that she's going to beat a prime Jessica Andrade. And she's had 21 fights, 16 wins and 5 losses. And in those 16 wins, she's had 8 knockouts of her own, 1 submission, and 7 decisions, and only been knocked out once, never submitted, and 4 losses. But I don't know. It's hard to say, but I know I always get into this thing when I do these fight cards. I always want to say everyone's going to get knocked out, but I feel that Jessica Andrade is definitely going to win this fight, and she's a powerhouse. When you want to think of powerhouses in the women's division, the one of the main ones you highlight, or the ones that you instantly think of, is Jessica Andrade. So I'm picking Jessica Andrade to win this one, and probably if any way it's going to happen, it's probably if it ends in submission, or if it is a finish, if it comes by way of finish, it'd probably be it'll probably be by knockout, or it'll probably be some kind of choke. So I'm in the women's flyweight in the second fight on the main card. I'm gonna pick Jessica Andrade, and I guess uh, to go away from well, I almost wanted to say uh, that she's gonna get choked. Jessica Andrade is gonna choke her out, but to go back to her record, she's never been submitted ever before. So I, I'm I was gonna say that she was gonna submit her, but she's never been submitted. So I guess I'll go back to her getting knocked out. So I'm gonna go with Jessica Andrade to defeat Lauren Murphy, and I'm gonna say it's gonna be by knockout. So I'm gonna go with Jessica Andrade via knockout at some point in this match. So on to the third fight on this card, and this is a welterweight bout between Gilbert Burns versus Neil Magny, and this fight almost look at similar to the Jessica Andrade Lauren Murphy matchup. Similar, not quite the same as like the age uh, being the deciding factor, I guess, but just just like the caliber of fighters, like because like Gilbert Burns has like fought like every like person that's fought like for the belt, the only people that Gilbert Burns fights and loses to are guys that have fought for the belt or had the belt. Like the only people he loses to are Hazmat Jemaya or Kamara Usman or guys like that. The last person that he lost to that wasn't like a main stay like star guy, you know, marquee primetime fighter was Dan Hooker, and that was back in July 2018. That was like forever ago. And then since then, he was on a 6 fight win streak, and then he lost to Kamara Usman, and that was for the UFC welterweight championship. So, and I mean that's just he's on a not. I mean he's just kind of on like another level compared to Neil Magny, who's kind of one of those guys who I'll give him credit. He's a UFC veteran. I think he's up there with one of the. I think he's for trying to think of what he's presently fighting at. This is a welterweight. I think he may have the most fights in the welterweight division or something like that, or maybe has the most finishes or something like that. I can't remember what stat it is. Most fights in the UFC welterweight division or some stat like that. So he's not afraid to fight anyone in the UFC or the welterweight division, but he's kind of one of those guys that's kind of like I don't want to know if I want to call him a UFC journeyman, but he's kind of on that Donald Cerrone type level, where he wins one, win two, lose one, win one, win three, lose one type of record in comparison to Gilbert Burns. So it's almost hard to pick the guy over Gilbert Burns because he has a record of 36 fights with 27 wins, 7 knockouts, uh, uh, 4 by submission, 16 by decision, two losses by knockout, 5 by submission, and 2 losses by decision. So, I mean, then you come over here and look at uh, Gilbert Burns. He has 25 matches, 25 fights, 20 wins, uh, uh, 6 by knockouts, uh, 8 by submission, 6 by decision, and then he has got 5 losses, 2 by knockout, 0 by submission, and 3 by decision. So, I mean, this just seems like another mismatch for this card. So this is a really interesting card, like the undercard to the undercard on the main card, leading into the co-main event, and the main event is kind of mismatches to some extent. Besides the first fight between Paul Craig and Johnny Walker, which is very interesting, a very interesting fight. But the Jessica Andrade and Lauren Murphy and the Gilbert Burns Neil Magny fight are very interesting. So I think I'm gonna go with the welterweight match between Gilbert Burns and Neil Magny. I think I'm gonna go with Gilbert Burns. I think he's gonna end up submitting. Honestly, I think he's gonna end up submitting Neil Magny. Uh, so that's what I'm going with the welterweight match between Gilbert Burns and Neil Magny. So on to the flyweight uh, bout between uh, Davison, the champion Davison Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno, the interim champion, flyweight interim champion. And I have a lot invested in this, and they're called. I like the term that they use for this. I don't know if this is official. They're calling this a quad trilogy. I think that's the term I heard. A quad trilogy, a quad trilogy. I think that's what I heard. I like that term for a quad fight, and this is the first one all time in the UFC, and I love this. I I'm highly invested in this fight because I've seen all of them, so I'm here for it, and I think for the most part I'm in the minority because I'm already going to tell you who I have. I think me telling you I'm in the minority kind of tells you who I'm already picking in this fight. I have no idea how this fight's going to go, but I think this is more of me being a fan than who I actually think is going to win or how I think it's going to go, because I think it's pretty much unpredictable to think of to predict how it's going to go because it's gone so many ways already because they fought 3 times. Because I mean, it's been finished. The first time it went majority draw. The second time, Brandon Moreno won submission, rear naked choke, and the third fight it went unanimous decision. Davison Figueiredo won unanimous decision, and a good portion of people thought Brandon Moreno won that fight. But I'm a Davison Figueiredo fan, so that's pretty much who I'm gonna go with. I think probably the majority of fans are a Brandon Moreno fan, and uh, uh, I was highly invested, and reason is the reason I like Davison Figueiredo so much is just I was really impressed and enticed by a flyweight having as much power. That's what I was impressed by, and that's the draw that really drew me in and made me a fan of Davison Figueiredo because he had so much power and knockout power. You don't really see that from smaller fighters, 125-pound fighters, him being able to grab on to to other fighters, other flyweights with just like a single arm uh, guillotine choke and choke out fighters like Alex Perez. So that kind of stuff is what impressed me about him. Single punch KOs and TKOs, things like that. So that's why I'm a Davison Figueroa, and him being such a large flyweight. So I, I I can't really go into it too much because it's just I think I'm more of a fan of Davison Figueroa, and I'm just in the minority of that because I think there's so many people that on the same scale, same size side of the coin are Brandon Moreno fans, and you follow this trilogy, and now it's a quad trilogy for the first time ever. You're kind of just pulling for your guy, and I can't really predict how this one's going to go, but just with how people hyped up Brandon Moreno so much, and they talk about how I think he was the first Mexican champ, uh, and that they really touted that as something that was so great, which that's amazing because there's been so many Brazilian champs, and there's been um, a lot of champions, a lot of Nigerian champions and stuff. So they really pushed that really hard, which that was great, but that didn't last too long once he ended up losing uh, the decision after the rematch. He ended up losing in January 2022. So he lost that, and then kind of lost its luster when he ended up having to win the Intercontinental title back, and that wasn't against Davison Figueroa. That ended up having to be against Cara France. So it kind of lost its luster as being the first Mexican or Mexican American champ. But honestly, I would take quite a bit of joy if Davison Figueroa just knocked KO'd Brandon Moreno. So with that, I know it's just a long-winded explanation of basically just saying that I'm just a Davison Figueroa fan more than anything. So for the co-main event, which honestly I think this just because it's a quad trilogy, these guys have already fought 3 times. I don't really understand why this isn't the main event, which I think it should be. So with the co-main event, which this is the fight I really want to see out of all the fights on this card. This is the one I want to see the most. So the flyweight co-main event for the unifying the flyweight title. Davison Figueroa, the champion, versus Brandon Moreno, the Intercontinental champion, to unify the title. I have Davison Figueroa, and I'm going with Davison Figueroa, and I would love to see him knock Brandon Moreno out. So that's what I got in that fight. And then for the main event, and that's the for the I'm guessing I gotta look at this. This is for the vacant light heavyweight championship between Glover Teixeira and Jamel Hill, and something that was kind of funny for this. Oh man, I can't remember his name. I gotta look it up. I'll look him up here. Always forget this clown's name. Okay, yeah. So that was something funny. Was Anthony Smith? He actually was trying to make weight so he could be like a possible replacement fighter if something accidentally happened to Jamel Hill or Glover Teixeira, if they ended up missing weight or ended up getting sick or injured and had to pull out of this fight. But he ended up missing weight to where he couldn't even be the replacement fighter. But I thought that was just, when I ended up thinking about it, I thought that was just hilarious that he would even want to being this possible replacement fighter for this fight, because what if Jamel Hill ended up pulling out of this fight and he would actually have to have a rematch with Glover Teixeira, which would just be insane. Why would he want to fight Glover Teixeira again? Because he, in that fight, first fight with Glover Teixeira almost killed that man. He beat him within an inch of his life, knocking some of his teeth out. And like, I can't remember who the ref was for that fight, but that referee just let that fight just keep going and going. Like, he almost let that man die. But uh, uh, he that is just crazy that the UFC would pick that clown, that stepping stone of a man. He, he's just a I just hard for me to even come up with the words that Anthony Smith would be an option for a replacement fighter. Like, after the beating that he originally took in that fight against Glover Teixeira, and why he would even think about him wanting to fight Glover Teixeira again. But anyways, let's actually get into the actual fight between these two. And I think most people know the history of Glover Teixeira. He had been on a long fighting, a long winning streak before he had originally lost his fight, but lost the belt to Yuri Prohaska, which a lot of people were surprised he lost that fight. A lot of people were probably surprised that didn't end up being like the fight of the night. And a lot of people were surprised he lost that fight, and he had been on a 6-fight winning streak, and he won the belt from Jan Blachowicz, but I guess he wasn't even able to defend the belt. So it's kind of a little bit of a Yuri Prohaska wasn't able to get the automatic rematch because I guess he had a shoulder injury that kept him from having the automatic rematch, but good on him for vacating the belt so it didn't hold up the division. And then obviously everyone knows about the draw between Magomad Ankalaev and Jan Blachowicz that set up this fight between Jamel Hill and Glover Teixeira. But man, it's kind of Jamel Hill. He's just kind of a young and up and coming fighter. He's only 31, and I put a lot of emphasis on age when talking about Lauren Murphy, and here we go. Maybe I'm disregarding it when talking about Glover Teixeira, who's 43 years old, but we've seen that he's a monster when it comes to his wrestling and just his ability to finish people, because he has 41 fights, 33 wins, 18 knockouts, 10 wins by submissions, 5 by decision, only 8 losses, 3 by knockout, 1 by submission. And that 1 by submission, the first time he'd ever been submitted was just probably by just complete exhaustion at 5 in the 5th round at the 4-minute and 32-second mark in that fight against Yuri Prohaska. And then he has four losses by decision. Maybe, I don't know if you want to say that was finally the old age catching up to him or not. And then you have Jamel Hill, who's more of the up and coming fighter, who is on a little bit of a winning streak, just a 3-fight winning streak. Knocked out Thiago Santos, who's probably definitely not the same fighter he was since his guess that was a unanimous or split decision win over John Jones, and has not been the same fighter since tearing like both of his knees up. And then he beat Johnny Walker, who's on this card, by KO, and then KO'd Jimmy Crute, and then he actually lost to Paul Craig, who is fighting Johnny Walker, got TKO'd, elbows and punches. So it's interesting because he has a very small sample size of fights in comparison to Glover Teixeira. Just 13 fights, 11 wins, 7 by knockouts, 4 by decisions. There's only one loss, which was by Paul Craig. By a very interesting how a lot of these fights on this card and fighters all intertwined, because they've either fought each other or fought each other and either beaten each other or lost to each other. They kind of all intertwined. So a lot of puzzle pieces will kind of fall into place after this event. So, and then he has one no contest, and that was against Kidson Baru, and that was at UFC on ESPN, Woodson versus Burns, and that was in May 2020, and that was originally a TKO, knee to the body and punches win for Hill, and then that's kind of a bullshit no contest, because then he tested positive for marijuana. So you take that as it is. I would still just say that was a TKO win, because I don't know how some people say marijuana is a performance enhancing drug, or it helps you with pain management, and somewhat, I don't know, people have a different opinion about that, but I find that hard to believe that really helped him knock that Kidson out. So I don't know. This is a bit of a tough fight to predict to some extent, but the thing that I think Glover Teixeira has going for him is that he was in Alex Pereira's corner when he beat Israel Adonijah. So he's training with Alex Pereira leading up to this fight. So I think he's got a good training partner to prepare for this fight against Jamel Hill, who I think Jamel Hill probably has a striking background, and that's probably his style, and that's kind of what he is, a knockout artist with 7 KOs. And I think I want to go with the guy that has 18 knockouts of his own, 10 submissions of his own, 28 total finishes of his own. The only thing that scares me is the age, the 43 age there, because it's like, is father time ever gonna catch up to you? But I don't really know how I would want to pick this fight to end, but just off of experience alone, I think I'm going to go with Glover Teixeira. I can't really say how this fight would end, but I'm just going to go with Glover Teixeira to win this fight, and just hope that it doesn't drag out into the later rounds, hopefully, like the Yari Prochazka fight did, and hopefully it doesn't end up dragging into the later rounds to where Glover Teixeira's stamina ends up getting really tested again, like Glover Teixeira did in his last fight. So I'm going to go with Glover Teixeira to get the vacant light heavyweight title, his title back. So I think those are my picks for the UFC 283 Teixeira versus Hill pay-per-view. So let's just go over those one more time. So in the light heavyweight bout between Paul Craig and Johnny Walker, I think I got Paul Craig to win by KO. And then in the white women's flyweight bout between Jessica Andrade versus Lauren Murphy, I think I got Jessica Andrade to win by knockout. And then in the welterweight bout between Gilbert Burns versus Neil Magny, I think I got Gilbert Burns to win by submission. And then in the flyweight championship bout unification title bout between the champion Davison Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno, the intercontinental champion Brandon Moreno. I have Davison Figueiredo. Hopefully, I want to KO Brandon Moreno. That's not how I'm picking it to go, but that's what I want. And then in the the main event, the light heavyweight vacant title bout, light heavyweight bout between Glover Teixeira and Jamel Hill. I'm just picking Glover Teixeira. TBD, to be determined how it happens, but I'm picking Glover Teixeira, and I, I'm predicting that this is one of those cards where I don't think this is an underwhelming card. I think this is a really good card. I'm excited about this card. So a lot of times I'll say a card is underwhelming and it ends up being great. And then I'll say a card is like excited. I'm really excited and I'm pumped up for it. And then it ends up being a dud. But hey, I hope UFC 283 ends up being great, and I hope the quad trilogy. I hope it ends up. I hope it ends up being. I hope it ends up being like everything everyone hopes for. Like I hope it doesn't end up being lackluster and anticlimactic because it's being billed as like this great fight, as these guys are like perfect matches for each other. Like these are their styles make fights, and these guys have the perfect styles for each other. So I hope it doesn't end up being a dud because the first three fights were classics, and I hope this is a classic as well. And like I said again, I don't understand why it's not the main event. But anyways, I think that's all I have for you. And with that, can I get a check, please?